Is my audio clear?
Yes.
Oh, great, great. Sounds good. Thank you. Let's start with the invocation. To the Supreme God, to the Great Divine Father and the Great Divine Mother, thank you for your priceless blessings, for your divine light, divine love, divine power, divine healing, guidance, mercy, help, and protection. Thank you. To our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great, great ones, we incredibly humbly thank you for your great blessings. We thank you so much. We thank you so much. We thank you so much. Thank you. All right, let's begin. All right, let's start. So I think they were talking about. We'll start from here only. Summary of master spiritual experiences. We have now come to the end of Sri Ramakrishna sadhana, a period of spiritual discipline. By the way, half the book is over. Just so now, half is remaining. 50 pages almost are done. We have now come to the end of Sri Ramakrishna sadhana, the period of his spiritual discipline. As a result of his supersensuous experiences, he reached certain conclusions regarding himself and spirituality in general. His conclusions about himself may be summarized as follows. First, he was an incarnation of God, a specially commissioned person whose spiritual experiences were for the benefit of humanity. Whereas it takes an ordinary man a whole life struggle to realize one or two phases of God, he had in a few years realized God in all his phases. Second, he knew that he had always been a free soul, that the various disciplines through which he had passed were really not necessary for his own liberation, but were solely for the benefit of others. Thus, the terms liberation and bondage were not applicable to him. As long as there are beings who consider themselves bound, God must come down to earth as an incarnation to free them from bondage, just as a magistrate must visit any part of his district in which there is trouble. Third, he came to foresee the time of his death. His words with respect to this matter were literally fulfilled. There is this very beautiful saying, no? Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharata abhyuthan. Basically, what the saying is कि whenever men will be bound or will be found bound by matter, I will take incarnation to liberate them or, to free them from bondage. So, in short, something is applicable over here also. Third, about spirituality in general, the following were his conclusions. First, he was firmly convinced that all religions are true, that every doctrinal system represents a path to God. He had followed all the main paths, and all had led him to the same goal. He was the first religious prophet recorded in the history to preach the harmony of religions. Okay. Second, the three great systems of thought known as dualism, qualified non dualism, and absolute non dualism. Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. He perceived to represent three stages in man's progress towards ultimate reality. They were not contradictory but complementary and suited to different temperaments. For the ordinary man with strong attachment to the senses, a dualistic form of religion prescribing a certain amount of material support, such as music and other symbols, is useful. A man of God realization transcends the idea of worldly duties, but the ordinary mortal must perform his duties, striving to be unattached, and to surrender the results to God. The mind can comprehend and describe the range of thought and experience up to the Vishishtadvaita and no further. So, dualism, mind can understand. Qualified non dualism, also mind can understand. Absolute non dualism, mind cannot really understand. So, the saying ki a man of God realization transcends the idea of worldly duties, but the ordinary mortal must perform his duties, striving to be unattached and to surrender the results to God. The mind can comprehend and describe the range of thought and experience up to the Vishishtadvaita and no further. The Advaita, the last word in spiritual experience, is something to be felt in Samadhi, for it transcends mind and speech. From the highest standpoint, the Absolute and its manifestation are equally real. See, from the highest standpoint, the Absolute and its manifestation are equally real. The Lord's name, His abode, and the Lord Himself are of the same spiritual essence. Everything is spirit, the difference being only in form. Third, Sri Ramakrishna realized the wish of the Divine Mother that through him she should found a new order. See, Sri Ramakrishna realized the wish of Divine Mother Kali that through him she should found a new order, consisting of those who would uphold the universal doctrines illustrated in his life. Fourth, his spiritual insight told him that those who were having their last birth on the mortal plane of existence and those who had sincerely called on to the Lord even once in their lives must come to him. Basically means those who are about to become great saints must come to him. That's what the book is saying. Again, his spiritual insight told him that those who were having their last birth on the mortal plane of existence and those who had sincerely called on the Lord even once in their lives must come to him. During this period, Sri Ramakrishna suffered several bereavements. The first was the death of a nephew named Akshay. After the young man's death, Sri Ramakrishna said, Akshay died before my very eyes, but it did not affect me in the least. I stood by and watched a man die. It was like a sword being drawn from the scabbard. I enjoyed the scene and laughed and sang and danced over it. They removed the body and cremated it. But the next day, as I stood there, pointing to the southeast veranda of this room, I felt a racking pain for the loss of Akshay, as if somebody were squeezing my heart like a wet towel. I wondered at it and thought that Master was teaching me a lesson. I was not much concerned even with my own body, much less with a relative. But if such was my pain in the loss of a nephew, how much more must be the grief of the householders at the loss of their near and dear ones. In 1871, Mathur died, and some 5 years later, Shambhu Malik, who was after Mathur's passing away, had taken care of Master's comfort. In 1873, died his elder brother Rameshwar, and in 1876, his beloved mother. All these bereavements left their imprint on the tender human heart of Sri Ramakrishna, albeit he had realized the immortality of the soul and illusoriness of birth and death. In March 1875, about a year before the death of his mother, the master met Keshav Chandra Sen. The meeting was a momentous event for both Sri Ramakrishna and Keshav. There, here the master for the India for the first time came into actual contact with a worthy representative of modern India, Brahma Samaj. Keshav was the leader of the Brahma Samaj, one of the two great movements that during the later part of the 19th century played an important part in shaping the course of the Renaissance of India. The founder of the Brahma movement had been the great Raja Ram Mohan Roy from 1774 till 1833. That's roughly 26 plus 33 years. Though born in an Orthodox Brahmin family, Raja Ram Mohan Roy had shown great sympathy for Islam and Christianity. He had gone to Tibet in search for the Buddhist mysteries. He had extracted from Christianity its ethical system but had rejected the divinity of Christ as he had denied the Hindu incarnations. The religion of Islam influenced him to a great extent in the formulation of his monotheistic doctrines, but he always went back to the Vedas for his spiritual inspiration. The Brahma Samaj, which he founded in 1828, was dedicated to the worship and adoration of the eternal, the unsearchable, the immutable being who is the author and preserver of the universe. The Samaj was open to all without distinction of color, caste, creed, nation, or religion. The real organizer of the Samaj was Devendranath Tagore from 1817 to 1805, from 1905, sorry. The father of the poet Rabindranath. His physical and spiritual beauty, aristocratic aloofness, and penetrating intellect, and his poetic sensibility made him the foremost leader of educated Bengalis. These addressed him by the respectful epithet of Maharishi, the great seer. The Maharishi was a Sanskrit scholar and, unlike Raja Ram Mohan Roy, drew his inspiration entirely from the Upanishads. He was an implacable enemy of image worship and also fought to stop the infiltration of Christian ideas into the Samaj. He gave the movement its faith and ritual. Under his influence, the Brahma Samaj professed one self existent supreme being who had created the universe out of nothing, the God of truth, infinite wisdom, goodness, and power, the eternal and omnipotent, the one without a second. Man should love him and do his will, believe in him and worship him, and thus merit salvation in the world to come. By far the ablest leader of the Brahmo Samaj movement was Keshav Chandra Sen from 1838 till 1884. Unlike Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Devendranath Tagore, Keshav was born of a middle-class Bengali family and had been brought up in an English school. He did not even know Sanskrit. He did not know Sanskrit and very soon broke away from the popular Hindu religion. Even at an early age, he came under the spell of the Christ and professed to have experienced the special favor of John the Baptist, Christ, and Saint Paul. When he strove to introduce Christ to the Brahmo Samaj, a rupture became inevitable with Devendranath. In 1868, Keshav broke with the older leader and founded the Brahmo Samaj of India. Devendra retaining leadership of the first Brahmo Samaj, now called Adi Samaj. Keshav possessed a complex nature. When passing through a great moral crisis, he spent much of his time in solitude and felt that he heard the voice of God. When a devotional form of virtue was introduced into the Brahmo Samaj, he spent hours in singing kirtan with his followers. He visited England in 1870 and impressed the English people with his musical voice, his simple English, and his spiritual fervor. He was entertained by the Queen Victoria. Returning to India, he founded centers of the Brahmo Samaj in various parts of the country. Not unlike a professor of comparative religion in a European university, he began to discover, about the time of his first contact with Sri Ramakrishna, the harmony of religions. He became sympathetic towards the Hindu gods and goddesses, explaining them in a liberal fashion. Further, He believed that he was called by God to dictate to the world God's newly revealed law, the new dispensation, the Navavidhan. In 1878, a schism divided Keshab's Samaj. Some of his influential followers accused him of infringing the Brahmo principles by marrying his daughter to a wealthy man before she had attained the marriageable age approved by the Samaj. The group succeeded, succeeded and established the Sadharan Brahma Samaj, Keshav remaining the leader of the Navavidhan. Keshav now began to be drawn more and more toward the Christ ideal. Though under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, his devotion to the Divine Mother also deepened. His mental oscillation between Christ and the Divine Mother of Hinduism found no position of rest. In Bengal and some other parts of the India, the Brahma movement took the form of Unitarian Christianity, scoffed at the Hindu rituals, and preached a crusade against image worship. Influenced by Western culture, it declared the supremacy of reason, advocated the ideals of the French Revolution. By the way, French Revolution, I am hoping you guys at least are aware of a little bit that anyone who didn't believe in the so-called the version of God um, of the those that were being the oppressors were killed, were basically just uh, you know either removed from society, were killed, were burned, were it was very very bad time by the way. So it says advocated ideals of the French Revolution, abolished the caste system, abolished the caste system. Um, its own members stood for the emancipation of women, agitate for the abolition of early marriage, sanctioned the remarriage of widows, and encouraged various educational and social reform movements. The immediate effect of the Brahmo movement in Bengal was the checking of the proselytization. Wow, what is this word? I need to Google this. Just give me a second. This means, what does this mean? The AI assistant of this never works. This means convert or attempt to convert someone from one religion, belief, or opinion to another, or advocate or promote a belief. So it says ki, the immediate effect of the Brahmo movement in Bengal was the checking of the conversion activities of the Christian missionaries. Checking means stopping or stopping the conversion. It also raised Indian culture in the estimation of its English masters, but it was an intellectual and eclectic religious ferment born of the necessity of the time. Unlike Hinduism, it was not founded on the deep inner experiences of sages and prophets. Its influence was confined to a comparatively few educated men and women of society. One second. Right, yeah. Mm, yeah. Its influence was confined to a comparatively few educated men and women of the country, and the vast masses of the Hindus remained outside it. It sounded monotonously only one of the notes in the rich gamut of the eternal religion of the Hindus. Arya Samaj, the other movement playing an important part in the 19th century revival of India, was the Arya Samaj. The Brahma Samaj, essentially a movement of compromise with European culture, tacitly admitted the superiority of the West. But the founder of the Arya Samaj was a pugnacious Hindu sannyasi who accepted the challenge of Islam and Christianity and was resolved to combat all foreign influence in India. Swami Dayananda, from 1824 till 1883, launched this movement in Bombay in 1875. So he had about 8 years, I think, after the movement was launched, right? And soon its influence was felt throughout Western India. The Swami was a great scholar of Vedas, which he explained as being strictly monotheistic. He preached against the worship of images and re-established the ancient Vedic sacrificial rites. According to him, the Vedas were the ultimate authority on religion, and he accepted every word of them as literally true. The Arya Samaj became a bulwark against the encroachments of Islam and Christianity, and its orthodox flavor appealed to many Hindu minds. It also assumed leadership in many movements of social reform. The caste system became a target of its attack. Women it liberated from many of their social disabilities. The cause of education received from it a great impetus. It started agitation against early marriage and advocated the remarriage of Hindu widows. Its influence was strongest in the Punjab, the battleground of the Hindu and Islamic cultures. A new fighting attitude was introduced into the slumbering Hindu society. Unlike the Brahmo Samaj, the influence of the Arya Samaj was not confined to the intellectuals. It was a force that spread to the masses and was a dogmatic movement intolerant of those disagreed with its views, and it emphasized only one way, the Arya Samaj way, to the realization of truth. Sri Ramakrishna met Swami Dayananda when the latter visited Bengal. Now, Keshav Chandra Sen and Sri Ramakrishna met for the first time in the garden house of Jaigopal Sen at Belgharia, a few miles from Dakshineshwar, where the great Brahmo leader was staying with some of his disciples. In many respects, the two were poles apart, though an irresistible inner attraction was to make them intimate friends. The master had realized God as a pure spirit and consciousness, but he believed but he believed in the various forms of God as well. Keshav, on the other hand, regarded image worship as idolatry and gave allegorical explanations of the Hindu deities. Keshav was an orator and a writer of books and magazine articles. Sri Ramakrishna had a horror of lecturing and hardly knew how to write down his own name. Keshav's fame spread far and wide, even reaching the distant shores of England. The master still led a secluded life in the village of Dakshineshwar. Keshav emphasized social reforms for India's regeneration. To Sri Ramakrishna, God realization was the only goal of life. Keshav considered himself a disciple of Christ and accepted in a diluted form the Christian sacraments and Trinity. Sri Ramakrishna was the simple child of Kali, the Divine Mother, though he too in a different way acknowledged Christ's divinity. Keshav was a householder and took a real interest in the welfare of his children, whereas Sri Ramakrishna was a Paramahamsa and completely indifferent to the life of the world. Yet, as their acquaintance ripened into a friendship, Sri Ramakrishna and Keshav held each other in great love and respect. Years later, at the news of Keshav's death, the master felt as if half his body had become paralyzed. Keshav's concepts of the harmony of religion and the motherhood of God were deepened and enriched by his contact with Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna, dressed in an red bordered dhoti, one end of which was carelessly thrown over his left shoulder. Came to Jayagopal's garden house accompanied by Hriday. No one took notice of the unostentatious visitor. Finally, the master said to Keshav, people tell me you have seen God, so I've come to hear from you about God. A magnificent conversation followed. The master sang a thrilling song about Kali and forthwith went into Samadhi. When Hriday returned, Hriday uttered the sacred Om in his ears, he gradually came back to consciousness of the world, his face still radiating a divine brilliance. Keshav and his followers were amazed. The contrast between Sri Ramakrishna and the Brahmo devotees was very interesting. There sat in this small man, thin and extremely delicate. His eyes were illumined with an inner light. Good humor gleamed in his eyes and lurked in the corners of his mouth. His speech was Bengali of a homely kind, with a slight, delightful stammer, and his words held men enthralled by their wealth of spiritual experience. Their inexhaustible store of smile and metaphor, their power of observation, their bright and subtle humor, and the wonderful catholicity, their ceaseless flow of wisdom, and around him now were the sophisticated men of Bengal, the best products of Western education, with Keshav, the idol of young Bengal, as their leader. Keshav's sincerity was enough for Sri Ramakrishna. Henceforth, the two saw each other frequently either at Dakshineshwar or at the temple of Brahma Samaj. Whenever the master was in the temple at the time of the divine service, Keshav would request him to speak to the congregation, and Keshav would visit the saint, in his turn with offerings of fruits and flowers. Interesting. Other Brahmo leaders. Gradually, other Brahmo leaders began to feel Sri Ramakrishna's influence, but they were by no means uncritical admirers of Master. They particularly disapproved of his ascetic renunciation and condemnation of women and gold. They measured him according to their own ideals of the householder's life, and some could not understand his samadhi and described it as nervous malady. They could not resist his magnetic personality. Among the Brahmo leaders who knew the master closely were Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, Vijay Krishna Goswami, Triloknath, Trilokanath Sanyal, and Shivanath Shastri. Shivanath one day was greatly impressed by Master's utter simplicity and abhorrence of praise. He was seated with Sri Ramakrishna in the latter's room when several rich men of Calcutta arrived. The master left the room for a few minutes. In the meantime, Hriday, his nephew, began to describe his samadhi to the visitors. The last few words caught the master's ear as he entered the room. He said to Hriday, what a mean-spirited fellow you must be to extol me thus before these rich men. You have seen their costly apparel and their gold watches and chains, and your object is to get from them as much money as you can. What do I care about what they think of me? Turning to the gentleman, no, my friends, what he has told you about me is not true. It was not the love of God that made me absorbed into God and indifferent to eternal life. I became positively insane for some time. The sadhus who frequented this temple told me to practice many things. I tried to follow them, and the consequence was that my austerities drove me to insanity. This is a quotation from one of Shivanath's books. He took the master's words literally and failed to see the real import. Shivanath vehemently criticized the master for his otherworldly attitude towards his wife. He writes Ramakrishna was practically separated from his wife, who lived in her village home. One day, when I was complaining to some friends about the virtual widowhood of his wife, he drew me to one side and whispered in my ear, "Why do you complain? It is no longer possible. It is all dead and gone." Another day, as I was in waiting against this part of the teaching, and also declaring that our program of work in Brahmo Samaj includes women, that ours is a social and domestic religion, and that we want to give education and social liberty to women, the saint became very much excited, as was his way when anything against his settled conviction was asserted, a trait we so much liked in him, and exclaimed, "Go, thou fool, go and perish in the pit that your women will dig for you." Then he glared at me and said, "What does a gardener do with a young plant? Does he not surround it with a fence to protect it from goats and cattle? And when the young plant is grown up to the tree and it can no longer be injured by cattle, does he not remove the fence and let the tree grow freely?" I replied, "Yes, that is the custom with gardeners." Then he remarked, "Do the same in your spiritual life. Become strong, be full grown, then you may seek them." To which I replied, "I don't agree with you in thinking that women's work is like that of a cattle, destructive. They are our associates and helpers in our spiritual struggles and social progress," a view with which he could not agree, and marked by dissent by shaking his head. Then, referring to the lateness of the hour, he jocularly remarked, "It's time for you to depart. Take care to not be late, otherwise your woman will not admit you into her room." This evoked a hearty laughter. Shivanath. Next, Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, the right hand man of Keshav and an accomplished Brahmo preacher in Europe and America, bitterly criticized Sri Ramakrishna's use of uncultured language and also his austere attitude towards his wife. But he could not escape the spell of Master's personality. In the course of an article about Sri Ramakrishna, Pratap wrote the, in quotes, Theistic Quarterly Review, "What is there in common between him and me? I, a Europeanized, civilized, self centered, semi skeptical, so called educated reasoner, and he, a poor, illiterate, unpolished, half idolatrous, friendless Hindu devotee. Why should I sit long hours to attend to him? I, who have listened to Disraeli and Fawcett, Stanley and Max Muller, and a whole host of European scholars and divines, and it is not only not I only, but dozens like me who do the same. He worships Shiva, he worships Kali, he worships Rama, he worships Krishna, and is a confirmed advocate of Vedantic doctrines. He is an idolater. He is yet is a faithful and most devoted meditator on the perfections of the one formless, absolute, infinite deity. His religion is ecstasy. His worship means transcendental insight. His whole nature burns day and night with the permanent fire and fever of a strange faith and feeling. So long as he is spared to us, gladly shall we sit at his feet to learn from him the sublime precepts of purity, unworldliness, spirituality, and inebriation in the love of God. He, by his childlike bhakti, by his strong conceptions of an ever ready motherhood, helped to unfold it, God as our mother, in our minds wonderfully. By associating with him, we learn to realize better the divine attributes as scattered over the 300 years and 330 million deities of mythological India, the gods of the Puranas. Again, by associating with him, we learn to realize better The divine attributes, as scattered over the 330 millions of the deities of mythological India, the gods of the Puranas. The Brahmo leaders received much inspiration from their contact with Sri Ramakrishna. It broadened their religious views and kindled in their hearts a yearning for God realization. It made them understand and appreciate the rituals and symbols of Hindu religion, convinced them of their manifestation of God in diverse forms, and deepened their thoughts about the harmony of religions. The master too was impressed by the sincerity of many of the Brahmo devotees. He told them about his own realization and explained to them the essence of the teachings, such as the necessity of renunciation, sincerity in the pursuit of one's own course of discipline, faith in God, the performance of one's duties without thought of results, and discrimination between real and the unreal. This contact with the educated and progressive Bengalis opened Sri Ramakrishna's eyes to a new realm of thought. Born and brought up in a simple village without any formal education, and taught by the orthodox holy men of India in religious life, he had no opportunity to study the influence of modernism on the thoughts and lives of the Hindus. He could not properly estimate the result of the impact of Western education on Indian culture. He was a Hindu of the Hindus, renunciation being to him the only means to the realization of God in life. From the Brahmos, he learned that the new generation of India made a compromise between God and the world. Educated young men were influenced more by the Western philosophers than by their own prophets. But Sri Ramakrishna was not dismayed, for he saw in this too the hand of God. And though he expounded to Brahmos all his ideas about God and austere religious disciplines, yet he bade them accept from his teachings only as much as suited their tastes and temperaments. There was a point of time that I was discussing, I think, with a cousin of mine. Um, she, I'm from a Sikh religion, right? So in our religion, hair cutting is like not accepted, right? And this was when I had proper full hair. I was, I think, 11th grade or something like that. I'm not sure. 11th grade. I had a proper hair properly. 2003, I think. And I was talking to a cousin of mine who was, well, I think 2 years or 2 or 3 years older to me, I think. Maybe even a little bit more older to me. And maybe say 4 or 5 years older to me, okay? And she had cut her hair, okay? And I was like, aren't you sick? You're not supposed to cut hair. And she was like, you know what? Take from the religion only what you can do. What you can't do or what you don't like, don't take. That's the Western philosophy. There's no strict uh, rules that you need to follow, nothing like that. Whatever you like, you do. Whatever you don't like, you don't do, right? The problem was that the religious teaching is not like a shopping experience or any form of meditation technique that you follow, Arhatic yoga, if you follow Shri Ravi Shankar's teaching or Sadhguru's teaching or Ramakrishna Mission's teaching, whichever teaching you follow, you don't just um, follow what you feel like and then baki ka main nahi karunga. That is, well, you can do that, but it's not going to result in much actually, eventually. It's like I will drive a car with only two wheels because I feel like doing it. Sure, you try it out. I don't know how far would you reach. Of course, in some areas there'll be progress, of course, there's no question about it. But it's usually the teaching is given as a proper, full, complete thing. Partial practice, because that is the amount of energy or the completeness of energy the soul needs and the bodies need. If you practice a part of it, you only progress in part, maybe, or maybe not even that. I don't understand how it actually works, but not even in that sense. So for spiritual progress, it tends to be perfect balance of the entire thing. So you practice Sri Ramakrishna's teaching or Krishnamurti's teaching or Osho's teaching, practice it completely. Don't practice in parts then. Same problem happens. Well, of course, in my mind, I was very influenced at that time. So I few years afterwards. I also got the haircut, I think 6 years, 7 years afterwards. But now I see it as a different thing. I don't see it as the same thing anymore. So, yeah, I mean, I'm telling you how Ramakrishna saw that the young people of India are looking at taking the teachings of what they can do, बाकी वो नहीं लेंगे, because they've read a lot of open-minded authors of the Western tradition. So you just tell them कि भैया जितना होता है उतना लो, बाकी का छोड़ दो. उन्होंने वही कहा उनको कि जितना होता है उतना करो, ऑस्टेरिटी वगैरह लेने की जरूरत नहीं है, बाकी का छोड़ दो. See, yet he bade them accept from his teachings only as much as suited their tastes and temperaments. The master's yearning for his own devotees. Aha. Contact with Brahmos increased Sri Ramakrishna's longing to encounter aspirants who would be able to follow his teaching in their purest form. There was no limit, he once declared, to the longing I felt at the time. During the daytime, I somehow managed to control it. The secular talk of the worldly minded was galling to me, and I would look wistfully to the day when my own beloved companions would come. मतलब इनके जो स्टूडेंट्स थे उनकी बात कर रहे हैं. I hope to find solace in conversing with them and relating to them my own realizations. Every little incident would remind me of them, and thoughts of them wholly engrossed me. I was already arranging in my mind what I should say to one and give to another, and so on. But when the day would come to a close, I would not be able to curb my feelings. The thought that one day had gone by and they had not come oppressed me. When during the evening service the temples rang with the sound of the bells and conch shells, I would climb to the roof of the kuti in the garden and writhing in anguish of the heart, cry at the top of my voice, "Come, my children! Oh, where are you? I cannot bear to live without you." A mother never longed so intensely for the sight of her child, nor a friend for his companions, nor a lover for his sweetheart, as I longed for them. Oh, it was indescribable. Shortly after this period of yearning, the devotees began to come. मतलब he basically went to the अपनी कुटी के ऊपर जाके खड़े हो गए छत पे, and he started shout, like he tried कि come my children. Shortly after this period of yearning, the devotees began to come. In the year 1879, occasional writings about Sri Ramakrishna by the Brahmos in the Brahmo magazines began to attract his future disciples from the educated middle class Bengalis, and they continued to come until 1884. But others too came, feeling the subtle power of his attraction. They were an ever shifting crowd of people of all castes and creeds, Hindu and Brahmos, Vaishnavas and Shaktas, the educated with university degrees and the illiterate, old and young, Maharajas and beggars, journalists and artists, Pandits and devotees, philosophers and worldly minded, Gnanis and yogis, men of action and men of faith, virtuous women and prostitutes, office holders and vagabonds, philanthropists and self seekers, dramatists and drunkards, builders up and pullers down. He gave to them all without stint from his illimitable store of realization. No one went away empty handed. He taught them the lofty knowledge of the Vedanta and the soul melting love of the Purana. 24 hours out of 24, he would speak without rest or respite. He gave to all his sympathy and enlightenment, and he touched them with that strange power of the soul which could not but melt even the most hardened. And people understood him according to their powers of comprehension. This is important. And people understood him according to their powers of comprehension, which means you can realize somebody, at least identify somebody to be a realized person only to the degree that you can comprehend. You like we can't comprehend how great our spiritual teacher Master Choa is. We have no idea of actually understanding that. And there is no way to find also, by the way, because our understanding is nothing beyond the physical world. We talk about spiritual world, but our real understanding of spiritual world is nil, literally zero. We don't even know if we have a soul. We talk about it. In knowledge, nothing. That's important to remember when we talk about the great teachers. Let's go forward. The master's method of teaching. But he remained as ever the willing instrument in the hand of God, the child of the Divine Mother, totally untouched by the idea of being a teacher. He used to say that three ideas: that he was a guru, a father, and a master, pricked his flesh like thorns. Three ideas: that he was a guru, a father, and a master, pricked his flesh like thorns. Yet he was an extraordinary teacher. Yet he was an extraordinary teacher. He stirred his disciples' hearts more by a subtle influence than by actions or words. He never claimed to be the founder of a religion or the organizer of a sect. Yet he was a religious dynamo. He was the verifier of all religions and creeds. He was like an expert gardener who prepares the soil and removes the weeds, knowing that the plants will grow because of the inherent power of the seeds, producing each its appropriate flowers and fruits. He never thrusts his ideas on anybody. He understood people's limitations and worked on the principle that what is good for one may be bad for another. He had the unusual power of knowing the devotees' minds, even in their inmost souls. At the first sight, he accepted disciples with full knowledge of their past tendencies and future possibilities. The life of evil did not frighten him, nor did religious squeamishness raise anybody in his estimation. He saw in everything the unerring finger of the Divine Mother. Even the light that leads astray was to him the light from God. To those who became his intimate disciples, the Master was friend, companion, and playmate. Even the chores of religious discipline would be lightened in his presence. The devotees would ask The devotees would be so inebriated with pure joy in his company that they would have no time to ask themselves whether he was an incarnation, a perfect soul, or a yogi. His very presence was a great teaching. Words were superfluous. In later years, his disciples remarked that while they were with him, they would regard him as a comrade, but afterward would tremble to think of his frivolities. In the presence of such a great person, they had convincing proof that Master could, by his mere wish, kindle in their hearts a love of God and give them his vision. Through all this fun and frolic, this merriment and frivolity, he always kept before them the shining ideal of God consciousness and the path of renunciation. He prescribed ascents, steep or graded according to their powers of the climber. मतलब he basically he told them the techniques of sadhana or meditation. He prescribed ascents, मतलब climbing of the soul, steep, मतलब almost vertical, a very quick spiritual growth, or graded, मतलब धीरे 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 करके according to the power of the climber, power of the soul basically. He permitted no compromise with the basic principles of purity. An aspirant had to keep his body, mind, and senses and soul unspotted, had to have a sincere love for God and a never mounting spirit of yearning. The rest would be done by the mother. His disciples were of two kinds: the householders and the young men, some of whom were later to become monks. There was also a small group of women devotees. Sections for household devotees. For the householders, Sri Ramakrishna did not prescribe the hard path of total renunciation. He wanted them to discharge their obligations to their families. Their renunciation was to be mental. Spiritual life could he Spiritual life could not be could not he acquired by flying away from responsibility. Spiritual life could not be acquired by flying away from responsibilities. A married couple should live like a brother and sister after the birth of one or two children, devoting their time to spiritual talk and contemplation. He encouraged the householders, saying that their life was in a way easier than that of a monk, since it was more advantageous to fight the enemy from inside a fortress than in an open field. He insisted, however, on their repairing into solitude every now and then to strengthen their devotion and faith in God through prayer, japa, and meditation. He prescribed for them the companionship of sadhus. He asked them to perform their worldly duties with one hand while holding to God with the other, and pray to God to make their duties fewer and fewer so that in the end they might cling to Him and with both hands. He would discourage in both the householders and the celibate youth any lukewarmness in their spiritual struggles. He would not ask them to follow indiscriminately the ideal of non-resistance, which ultimately makes a coward of the unwary. इसका मतलब ये है कि whenever there are spiritual struggles, you may tend to become lukewarm. Lukewarm का मतलब um, you may tend to give in sometimes, it's okay, chalta hai. Basically, temptations, emotional temptations, mental temptations. Um, but he said ki be very strict with your discipline of your thoughts, your speech, your word, your action, absolute purity at all possible levels. No lukewarmness. So these are the spiritual struggles which he says should be for everybody. And he says ki I don't allow that. That's why he says ki he prescribed for them the companionship of sadhus. He asked them to perform their worldly duties with one hand and while holding to God with other, and pray to God to make their duties fewer and fewer so that in the end they might cling to Him with both hands. He would discourage in both the householders and the celibate youths any lukewarmness in their spiritual struggles. He would not ask them to follow indiscriminately the ideal of non resistance, which ultimately makes a coward of the unwary. अब इसका मतलब भी ये है, नॉन रेजिस्टेंस का मतलब ये है कि जो हो रहा है होने दो, आई डोंट रेजिस्ट एनीथिंग, एंड सो यू डोंट लर्न टू बेसिकली पिक अप एंड फाइट योर पिक योरसेल्फ अप एंड फाइट। तो वो बोला कि सब जगह पे नॉन रेजिस्टेंस मत लगाओ बेवकूफ की तरह। You become a coward, you will become somebody who doesn't know how to stand up for himself and fight actually. So don't apply this everywhere. Apply it in a specific way, specific manner कि अपना कर्म सबसे अच्छी तरह से करो, but don't be bothered too much about um, if you get the fruits or not. In that sense, be discriminative. Sorry, be non-resisting. कि whatever God gives, but I'll still put all my efforts in an upright manner. Something like that. Future monks. But to the young men destined to be monks, he pointed out the steep path of renunciation, both external and internal. They must take the vow of absolute continence and eschew all thought of greed and lust. By the practice of continence, matlab sexual retention, aspirants develop a subtle nerve through which they understand the deeper mysteries of God. For them, self control is final, imperative, and absolute. The sannyasis are teachers of men, and their lives should be totally free from blemish. They must not even look at the picture which may awaken their animal passions. The master selected his future monks from young men, untouched by, in quotes, women and gold, and plastic enough, but the minds plastic enough to be cast in his spiritual mold. When teaching them the path of renunciation and discrimination, he would not allow the householders to be anywhere near them. Ram and Manomohan. The first two householder devotees to come to Dakshineshwar were Ramchandra Datta and Manomohan Mitra, a medical practitioner and chemist. Ram was skeptical about God and religion and never enjoyed a peace of soul. He wanted tangible proof of God's existence. The master said to him, God really exists. You don't see the stars in the daytime, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. There is butter in milk, but can anybody see it merely by looking at the milk? To get the butter, you must churn the milk in a quiet and a cool place. You cannot realize God by mere wish. You must go through some mental disciplines. By degrees, the master awakened Ram's spirituality, and the latter became one of his foremost disciples. It was Ram who introduced Narendranath, which, by the way, is Vivekananda, to Sri Ramakrishna. Narendra was a relative of Ram. Manomohan at first met with considerable opposition from his wife and other relatives who resented his visits to Dakshineshwar. But in the end, the unselfish love of the master triumphed over worldly affection. It was Manomohan who brought Rakhal to I think, to Master Surendra. Suresh Mitra, a beloved disciple whom the master often addressed as Surendra, had received an English education and held an important post in an English firm. Like many other educated young men of the time, he prided himself on his atheism and led a bohemian life. He was addicted to drinking. He cherished an exaggerated notion about man's free will. A victim of mental depression, he was brought to Sri Ramakrishna by Ramachandra Datta. When he heard the master asking a disciple to practice the virtue of self surrender to God, he was impressed. But though he tried thenceforth to do so, he was unable to give up his old associates and his drinking. One day, the master said in his presence, well, when a man goes out to an undesirable place, why doesn't he take the Divine Mother with him? And to Surendra himself, Sri Ramakrishna said, why should you drink wine as wine? Offer it to Kali, then take it as her prasad and as consecrated drink. But see that you don't become intoxicated. You must not reel and your thoughts must not wander. At first, you will feel ordinary excitement, but soon you will experience spiritual exaltation. Gradually, Surendra's entire life was changed. The master designated him as one of those commissioned by the Divine Mother to defray a great part of his expenses. Surendra's purse was always open for master's comfort. Wow. We'll read the remaining portion from the next session. Let's do a closing prayer. To the Supreme God, to the Great Divine Father and the Great Divine Mother, thank you for your great blessings. We very humbly thank you to our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great ones, to our souls, to our divine selves, to the great spiritual teacher, Sri Paramahamsa Ramakrishna. We thank you for your great blessings. We thank you so much. Thank you. See you next time. Take care. God bless all of you. And namaste, everyone. Take care. Bye bye. Have fun. Good book, no?